Imagine a university linguistics scholar.
Okay, I'm picturing tweed jackets, maybe some elbow patches.
Right, exactly. Dusty libraries and, these incredibly fierce debates over the precise grammatical structure of, 17th century French.
Oh, definitely. Very
So
serious.
now imagine that exact same scholar shotgunning a cheap beer in a dive bar parking lot, picking up this beaten-up acoustic guitar, and basically turning the slurred slang he hears around him into a chart-topping punk anthem.
I mean, it sounds like an impossible combination, right? Or at least like a character from a very strange novel. Because people usually stay in their lanes.
Yeah,
The
go.
academic stays up in the ivory tower and the punk stays down in the basement. They don't really mix.
What they do. And today, we are pulling apart a really fascinating 2026 music column from MMR to figure out how one real-life artist completely obliterated those lanes. So our mission for this deep dive is to explore the career of Jérôme 50.
Such an interesting guy.
He really is. We are going to look at how he used the raw, unfiltered, and honestly sometimes entirely messy slang of Quebec streets to bridge this massive gap between urban intellectuals and rural workers.
Right. He took what traditionalists considered imperfect language, I guess you could say, and forged it into a badge of cultural pride.
Exactly. So to set this up, we have a lot of ground to cover with this MMR profile.
Yeah.
We're going to track his journey from being a teenager busking in the old town of Quebec City to becoming this major cultural phenomenon who successfully weaponized the concept of chilling.
Weaponized chilling, yeah.
And we'll see how he united a fiercely divided society right in the middle of the pandemic, and ultimately how he had to confront his own self-destructive demons.
Yeah, we are tracking a very deliberate ideological evolution here. It's not just a guy getting lucky with a hit song.
No, not at all. But to truly understand how he united a culture, we first, have to establish what that culture actually looked like when he arrived on the scene.
Right, the context is everything.
Because in the late 2010s, the indie pop scene in Quebec was, well, it was very distinct. It was incredibly urban, very art-focused, and it leaned super heavily into this sort of refined Francophone sophistication.
Yeah, you had this really polished intellectual atmosphere dominating the critical conversation at the time, and then into that very curated room walks Jérôme Charette Pepin.
From the suburbs, right?
Yeah, born in L'Ancien Lorette, which is a working-class suburb of Quebec City. He started writing lyrics when he was just a kid, honestly, and by his late teens, he was out there busking on Rue Saint-Jean.
Wow, just playing on the street.
Exactly, playing directly to tourists, the locals, the late-night crowds stumbling out of bars. He really had to learn how to capture an audience that was literally just walking past him.
Which is a completely different skill set than, playing to a captive audience in some velvet-lined theater. You have to be loud, you have to be immediate, and you have to speak their language.
Spot on, and he took that literal requirement, like actually speaking their language, and made it his academic focus. He didn't just stay on the street. He actually enrolled at Laval University.
Oh, to study linguistics, right?
Yes, which is so wild.
Which usually means you're headed for a life of academic papers in sterile classrooms.
Right, but instead of looking down at the street from that academic tower, he took all those rigorous analytical tools he learned in the classroom and basically brought them right back to the pub.
Okay, let's unpack this. It's as if a botanist, instead of cataloging rare, delicate orchids in some sterile, climate-controlled lab, decided the most important plants in the world were the dandelions, stubbornly growing through the cracks in a concrete parking lot.
Oh, I love that comparison. That's exactly it.
He saw the structural brilliance and the cultural weight in the exact language that traditional institutions were desperately trying to weed out.
Yes. And, okay, as someone who loves linguistics, this is honestly my absolute favorite part of his story. Because he signaled this philosophy immediately with his stage name.
He didn't go with something artsy.
No, not at all. He didn't use a sophisticated moniker. He chose Jérôme 50, which is a direct, totally unapologetic reference to Labatt 50.
The beer.
Yeah, a classic, cheap, working-class Quebec beer. So the name itself is this aesthetic manifesto. He's valuing the pub crowd over the intellectuals right from the jump.
And he actually backed that up academically, didn't he?
He did. He worked on something called the Dictionnaire du Chilleur, the Dictionary of the Chiller.
Wait, a dictionary entirely dedicated to straight slang?
Yes, and think about the subversive nature of that project, because dictionaries are, historically speaking, prescriptive.
Right. They tell you the rules.
Exactly. They exist to put language in a cage, basically. They're designed by institutions to fix language, to formalize what is correct, and to explicitly keep out what is incorrect. But he weaponized the whole format.
He used the academic structure against itself.
Yes, he used this formal structure to record fluid, messy, franglais-heavy street slang. We are talking about taking English verbs and conjugating them with French endings, dropping syllables, blending idioms, and he validated it. He treated it as a living, breathing culture rather than just like broken French.
See, that distinction changes everything, especially in a place like Quebec, where preserving the French language in an English-speaking continent is, a deeply existential and political issue. There's immense pressure to speak properly to protect the heritage.
Huge pressure.
And he's essentially looking at these kids and saying, you aren't a threat to Quebecois identity. You are the very heart of its evolution.
Which is such a powerful message, and his academic study of street slang naturally evolved into a study of the people actually using that slang, like how they lived, what they valued, and maybe more importantly, what they were completely exhausted by.
Which brings us to 2018.
Right, his first major philosophical breakthrough in music, the album La Hiérarchie.
La Hiérarchie. So a portmanteau blending hierarchy and chill. It's brilliant branding, I'll give him that, but I have to push back on this a little bit before we dig in.
Okay, go for it.
Isn't chilling just a luxury? I mean, how does an artist who clearly works incredibly hard, writing, recording, studying linguistics, touring enough to win major industry awards, champion the idea of doing absolutely nothing? Isn't portraying yourself as a professional slacker a bit hypocritical?
So that is the immediate assumption everyone makes, right? But what's fascinating here is that the irony is actually the core of his social critique.
How so?
Well, he wasn't just writing literal songs about wanting to sleep in or being lazy. La Hiérarchie was framed as a passive resistance against neoliberalism. It was a direct response to the relentless grinding pressure of the modern gig economy.
Oh, like the cultural demand to just work harder, succeed faster, optimize your morning routine.
Exactly, and monetize all your hobbies, right? Against that immense, crushing societal pressure, doing nothing becomes a radical act of rebellion.
The endless hustle culture.
Right. And the social critique worked so well because it actively avoided being preachy. I mean, think about it. If he had come out with a serious, finger-wagging, acoustic manifesto about the evils of late-stage capitalism.
People would have just rolled their eyes and tuned out.
Exactly. Nobody wants a lecture when they're finally off the clock.
So by using humor and avoiding that intellectual condescension, he basically turned fatigue into this massive, shared cultural inside joke.
He really did.
He looked at the academic who is stressed out of their mind about achieving tenure, and the barfly who is physically destroyed from a double shift at the manufacturing plant, and said, we are all getting played by this system, let's just grab a beer.
That's a perfect way to phrase it. And musically, he packaged this resistance in a sound that was incredibly eclectic and welcoming.
But it wasn't just punk yet, right?
No, not yet. He blended traditional folk storytelling, alt-country, some lo-fi pop, and classic chanson. It was catchy, it was warm, and the industry definitely noticed. I mean, he was nominated for Alternative Album of the Year at the ADSQ Awards, and he actually won Révélation de l'année, which is Breakthrough Artist of the Year.
Wow, so that unifying exhaustion eventually exploded into a massive cultural phenomenon. It thrust him entirely out of the indie scene and right into the absolute mainstream. And this happened right in the middle of one of the most isolating, dividing events in modern history.
The COVID-19 pandemic.
Exactly. In 2021, when the world was just totally fractured, he released a track called Toke Bakachit.
And we really need to pause on that title because the spelling is key.
Yeah, it is a heavy phonetic spelling of the phrase On est au Québec ici, basically translating to, we're in Quebec here. It's the kind of slang phrase that carries a ton of regional baggage. Depending on who is saying it, it can be fiercely defiant, deeply local, or even exclusionary. And this song completely took over the radio.
It did. It actually became a SOCAN popular song.
Which is huge.
Yeah, to give you some context on what that means, a SOCAN is a massive music rights organization.
Yeah.
Winning that award means the song wasn't just some indie darling that critics liked. It essentially dominated the commercial radio airways and reached saturation levels across the entire population.
And the reason it became such a massive hit is crucial to understanding his genius. The song impartially mocked absolutely everyone across the political spectrum.
Oh, nobody was safe.
Right. And to be incredibly clear to you, the listener, We are simply reporting the specific targets mentioned in his lyrics here, not taking or endorsing any political sides ourselves. But the source material points out that he aimed his lyrics at environmentally conscious urban liberals, specifically mocking the hypocrisy of certain lifestyles, while simultaneously taking aim at discriminatory police culture and authoritarian attitudes.
Yeah, the song operated like a panoramic mirror held up to the entire society. Because he refused to pick a side, because he roasted everyone equally with that same cheeky observational humor, he managed to reach an audience that usually never listens to the same radio stations.
That's so rare.
Intellectuals were analyzing it, rural workers were blasting it, conservatives, liberals, indie snobs. He even mentioned in an interview that he was stunned to learn the song was a massive hit at truck driver rallies.
So what does this all mean? Think about your own country's urban-rural divide, whether you are in the US, Europe, or anywhere else. Usually an artist has to pick a demographic to be popular. You are either the sophisticated voice of the cosmopolitan city, or you are the authentic voice of the heartland. How did Jérôme 50 manage to roast everybody without getting canceled by anybody?
Well, it comes down to what the MMR profile calls his free spirit approach. He isn't looking for ideological purity in anyone, including himself. He is genuinely interested in humans who exist with glaring contradictions.
Because we all do.
Exactly. He observes the roughness and sometimes the harshness of rural culture, but he also observes the sheer arrogance and the isolated bubble of city intellectuals. And crucially, he does this without sheer nostalgia.
He's not looking back with rose-colored glasses.
No, he isn't romanticizing the past as some golden era. He's documenting the messy, highly flawed present. And audiences are incredibly perceptive. They can tell when an artist actually likes them, flaws and all.
They can feel the affection behind the roast. And he kept pushing that boundary of observation too. In 2023, he dropped an album called Anti-Geographiquement, meaning anti-geographically. He really doubled down on observing the weird, gritty realities of this divided society, blurring the lines between the city and the country.
Thematically, that album is just a sprawling map of modern contradictions. He explores rural hipsters, city people bringing their urban anxieties out to the countryside.
Right.
He sings about people collecting cans for change, the modern consumption of pornography, and the universal reality of death. And musically, the album is just as chaotic as the themes. It jumps wildly from disco beats to ska rhythms.
But being that acute of an observer, taking in all the flaws, the exhaustion, and the contradictions of society, well, eventually, that forces you to turn that same harsh lens inward. The geographical and political divides he was singing about began to violently mirror his own internal divides.
Yeah, and this brings us to 2025 and a massive, really jarring shift in both his career and his personal life. He released the album Anarchalique.
And this wasn't just a thematic shift, it was a total sonic pivot. He stepped way back from the warm folk and acoustic chanson elements that made him famous. Instead, he dove headfirst into ska punk, pop punk, and what the source describes as a trash aesthetic.
He cited a heavy influence from 90s punk legends like NOFX.
Which is a huge departure.
Massive! And the lyrics match the aggressive, frantic sound. The album title itself, Anarchalique, which is a blend of anarchic and alcoholic, is a massive clue. The song titles drop the chill facade completely. You have tracks like Y'a plus de poudre dans poudre, meaning there's no more powder in the powder, which hints at the terrifying realities of modern lace drugs. You have Chérie, arrête de boire, Honey, stop drinking, and Le King de la Consommation, the king of consumption.
So he used this incredibly aggressive album to explicitly confront his own severe alcohol and drug addiction. In 2025, he publicly discussed his journey into sobriety, making it very clear that it wasn't a battle he had neatly won, tied up with a bow, and put behind him. He stated plainly that he has to take his life 24 hours at a time.
Let's look at the mechanics of why he chose ska punk for this confession, because the contrast on this album is staggering, but it is musically deliberate. You have the intense festivity of the genre, blaring brass horns, walking bass lines, incredibly upbeat, frantic tempos.
It sounds like a party.
Right. But it mimics the physiological feeling of a manic high. The chaotic, breathless tempo of NoFX-style punk perfectly mirrors the neurological and physical chaos of severe addiction.
Here is where it gets really interesting. You have the most upbeat, danceable, party-ready genre in the world being used to document the absolute rock-bottom reality of a failing physical body. It's like hiding a desperate cry for help inside a brightly colored piñata. You're invited to the party, the music is fast, everyone is dancing, but when you break it open, it's just pure, unfiltered pain.
That is exactly it. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the music itself becomes an auditory representation of his failing physical state. The frantic energy isn't joy, it's a panic attack.
Wow.
And this vulnerability is exactly what cemented his legacy. Because before Anarchalique, he could have easily been remembered as just a clever, cheeky social observer, a guy with a linguistics degree who played a good character to win awards.
Right, just the smart guy who sang the funny song about everyone being tired.
Exactly. But this album proved he wasn't just observing the chaos from the outside. The stark realism of his depleted body, as the column painfully describes it, gave his entire body of work profound, undeniable depth. It completed his transition from a witty observer to a fully realized, deeply flawed human being struggling right alongside the working class people he had been singing about.
It strips away any remaining illusion of that academic superiority we talked about at the beginning. He's basically saying, I'm not just studying the dandelion in the dive bar parking lot, I'm the one passed out next to it.
And that brutal honesty places him firmly in a very specific, revered lineage in Quebec culture. The MMR column points out that he is the modern heir to Quebec's great chanson tradition. He is following in the footsteps of folk poetry legends like Georges Brassens, Richard Desjardins, Jean Leloup, and Dédé Fortin.
To understand the weight of that comparison, for those who might not know, artists like Jean Leloup and Dédé Fortin aren't just viewed as successful musicians in Quebec. They are treated as the cultural voices of their respective generations. They articulated the soul of the province.
And Jérôme 50 updated that sacred tradition for the internet generation. He smashed together traditional folk storytelling, the manic energy of punk rock, and hyper-local, rule-breaking regional slang.
All in one package.
Yeah, and in doing so, he proved something vital. Rural, working-class culture isn't some dusty relic of the past that needs to be preserved in amber by academics. It is the beating, mutating, chaotic heart of modern identity.
It's a powerful realization, and it makes you think about your own life and the way you communicate. Think about the slang, the accent, or the regional dialect you use when you are totally relaxed, hanging out in the backyard with your oldest friends.
Right.
Do you hide that voice when you go to the office? Do you view it as improper or unprofessional? Do you flatten yourself out to be taken seriously?
We all code switch to some degree to navigate the world, but Jérôme 50's career asks us why we feel the need to hide the truest, most expressive parts of our cultural voice just to appease a formal institution.
Which brings us right back to that dictionary he helped write and the dandelion breaking through the pavement. So, we will leave you with this lingering thought. If traditional institutions try to preserve a culture by locking its language inside strict grammar rules and formal dictionaries, is it possible that the only way a culture actually survives is if its language is allowed to run wild, get drunk, and mutate in the streets?
That is a question definitely worth pondering the next time you find yourself correcting someone's grammar.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.